Shane Bradford hadn't slept more than 3 hours the night before, and it showed in the way he clutched his coffee like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The café was packed. Of course, rainy Saturday mornings in Brooklyn had a way of drawing every stroller-pushing parent and laptop-tapping freelancer out of hiding. Shane balanced a paper bag of banana muffins in one hand and his 5-year-old son, Jake, in the other, scanning the café for a seat like his life depended on it. "I'm tired, Daddy," Jake mumbled, dragging his Spider-Man backpack behind him. "I know, bud," Shane said, crouching to zip it up before someone tripped over it. "Just a few minutes, all right? We'll sit, eat, and then go to the library." Jake's lower lip jutted out in protest, but Shane didn't have the energy to bargain. He spotted a woman sitting alone at a two-top table by the window, her eyes locked on a book, half-finished cappuccino in front of her. She looked peaceful and expensive. Her coat was the kind you didn't find on sale, draped neatly over the back of her chair. Still, desperate times. "Excuse me," Shane said, his voice low but polite. "Would you mind if we join you? It's just there's no other seats, and he's about 5 seconds from melting down." The woman looked up. Her eyes were a soft hazel flecked with gold. She blinked, surprised, then smiled warmly. "Of course," she said, gesturing to the empty chairs. "Please." Shane exhaled in relief and guided Jake into the seat, unwrapping his muffin and handing it over. "Thank you," he added, brushing rainwater off his jacket. "You just saved me from a full-scale tantrum." "I have nieces," she said with a wink. "I know that look." Shane smiled, finally taking a sip of his coffee. "I'm Shane, by the way, and this is Jake." "Emery," she said. "Nice to meet you both." Jake waved with a mouthful of muffin. "Hi." Emery laughed, and it wasn't the polite kind. It was the kind that felt real, genuine. Shane hadn't heard that kind of laugh from anyone in a long time. They chatted lightly while Jake focused on his muffin. Shane explained he used to be a mechanical engineer, but was let go during a round of budget cuts last year. Since then, he'd been doing handyman jobs and driving deliveries to make ends meet. Emery didn't ask for more than that, just nodded and listened. She told him she worked in investments, which was vague, but he didn't push. He figured she probably worked for a firm in the city, someone else's name on the door. What Shane didn't know was that Emery Hollies didn't work for anyone. She owned 3 companies, sat on 2 charity boards, and had more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. But sitting across from a tired father and his sweet, muffin-smeared kid, she didn't want to be a millionaire. She just wanted to stay, unnoticed. She had seen Shane before. Twice, actually. Once at the park, helping Jake fly a crooked kite Emery's niece had pointed out, and again at the grocery store, juggling a box of cereal and a toddler meltdown like a pro. She hadn't spoken to him either time, but something about the quiet strength in his eyes stuck with her. And now, here he was, offering her a seat like she was the one in need. "You're really good with him," Emery said, watching Jake try to balance a blueberry on his nose. Shane looked up, surprised. "Thanks, I try, it's just the 2 of us, so kinda have to be." Emery tilted her head. "No family around." He shook his head. "My parents passed when I was in college, Jake's mom. She left when he was 2, said she wasn't cut out for it." "I'm sorry," Emery said softly. "Don't be, we're doing okay." He glanced at Jake, who was now giggling as the blueberry rolled off his nose and onto the table. "He keeps me grounded." Emery smiled, but there was something in her chest that twisted an ache she hadn't expected. She admired him, not out of pity, but for the way he carried himself, tired but steady, kind without effort. The world didn't make men like that anymore. "Listen," she said suddenly, digging through her purse. "I have tickets to this kids' science exhibit at the museum this afternoon. My niece got sick, so I've got 2 extras. You and Jake should go." Shane blinked. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, sliding the envelope across the table. But I want to. He looked down at the tickets. VIP access, not the kind of thing he could ever afford. That's really generous, are you sure? She nodded, absolutely. Jake tugged his dad's sleeve. Can we go, Daddy, please? Shane looked between his son and Emery. Something inside him hesitated. He hated feeling like a charity case, but the hope in Jake's eyes disarmed him. All right, he said finally. Thank you, Emery, seriously. Emery smiled, her heart pounding harder than it should have. As they got up to leave, Jake gave her a quick hug around the waist, muffin crumbs and all. Shane offered a sheepish smile and pulled him back gently. We'll text you a thank you, he said. Do you want to write down your number? Emery paused. Actually, why don't I give you my card? She reached into her purse and handed him a sleek black card with her name embossed in silver. Just her name. No company, no title. Call me, she said, her voice light but her eyes serious. If you want to. He took the card, nodded, and left with Jake in tow. Emery watched them disappear into the crowd, her fingers still warm where Jake had hugged her. Shane tucked the card into his wallet without looking at it again. He had no idea she was a millionaire. And he had no idea she was already falling for him. The museum was more crowded than Shane expected, but Jake didn't seem to notice. He practically bounced from one exhibit to the next, eyes wide with wonder as lights blinked from the walls and robotic arms waved in dance-like sequences. Shane kept one hand on his son's shoulder and the other in his jacket pocket, fingers brushing the edge of the black card Emery had given him. He hadn't called her, not yet. He told himself it was because he didn't want to get the wrong idea, that this, whatever it was, had just been a kind gesture from a stranger. But that wasn't the full truth. The truth was, she'd unsettled something in him. Not in a bad way. In a way that made him feel like someone had looked right through the tired and the broke and the barely holding it together and saw something worth sitting with. Jake tugged on his sleeve. Daddy, did you see the lasers? Shane crouched to his level. I did. Pretty cool, huh? I want to make one, Jake said with the kind of certainty only 5-year-olds could manage. Shane grinned. Well, let's start with some batteries and see where it goes. They wandered through the rest of the exhibits until Jake started yawning mid-sentence. Shane checked the time and decided to call it. By the time they stepped out into the late afternoon drizzle, Jake was asleep on his shoulder, his breath warm against Shane's neck. The cab ride home was quiet, save for the soft patter of rain on the windows and the gentle hum of the tires. Shane leaned back, his head resting against the cool glass, Emery's card still in his pocket. He didn't call her that night either. Instead, he made grilled cheese for dinner, helped Jake build a tower of mismatched blocks, and fell asleep with his son curled into his side on the couch. It wasn't until 3 days later that he saw her again. He was changing a light fixture in the lobby of an old brownstone in Park Slope, a job he took through a friend of a friend when the elevator doors opened, and Emery stepped out. She was carrying a bag from a gourmet bakery, a folded newspaper tucked under her arm. Her heels made no sound on the tile, and she looked like she belonged in a magazine not just because of the clothes, but because of the way people moved around her, like she took up more space than she physically did. Shane froze on the ladder, wire cutters in one hand, the other bracing himself on the ceiling tile. Emery blinked once, then smiled. Well, this is unexpected. He climbed down, brushing plaster dust from his palms. Yeah, you live here. Top floor, she said, adjusting the bag in her arms. I bought the penthouse last fall. He didn't know what stunned him more, the fact that she lived in a building like this, or the casual way she said it, like buying a penthouse was as routine as grabbing milk. I thought you said you worked in investments, he said slowly. I do, she replied, then tilted her head. Why do you look like just told you I was a spy? Shane wiped his hands on his jeans. Because I think I'm starting to realize I might have bought my son a muffin with the woman who owns half of Brooklyn. She laughed, not the polite kind, but the real one again. Only a third, promise. He shook his head, smiling despite himself. So you're just casually buying penthouses and handing out museum tickets to strangers in cafes. I'm selective about my strangers, she said, stepping closer. He looked at her, really looked. Same eyes, same warmth, but now something sharper underneath. Not unkind, just layered. I didn't call, he said after a moment. I noticed. I wasn't sure what to say. That tends to happen when people make assumptions, she said gently, like thinking someone's too far out of reach to bother. He stared at her, caught off guard by the accuracy. I didn't think you were out of reach, he said after a beat. I thought I wasn't even in the same galaxy. She looked at him, then not like someone amused, but like someone considering something weighty. I don't care about galaxies, she said. Care about people who see others clearly. You didn't see money when you looked at me, Shane. You saw a woman with a half-drunk cappuccino and a good book. You're not wrong, he admitted, but also see someone who doesn't tell people who she really is. Something flickered across her face, but she didn't flinch. I stopped leading with my bank account a long time ago. People treat you differently when they know. I didn't, he said. No, she agreed, you didn't. Silence stretched between them as the distant hum of traffic drifted in through the glass doors. She shifted the bakery bag. I was going to sit on the rooftop and eat this overpriced croissant while pretending understood the stock market section. Want to join me? He hesitated, then glanced down at his shirt, streaked with dust and paint. I'm a little underdressed for penthouse rooftops. Emery grinned, that's the point. She led him up the elevator, and he followed, still unsure if this was the beginning of something or just a very surreal detour in his otherwise chaotic week. The rooftop was quiet, with tall potted plants lining the edges and a view of the river just beyond the skyline. Emery laid out the pastries on a small table, then sat on one of the cushioned benches, folding her legs beneath her. Shane stayed standing at first, taking it all in. You built this, he asked, nodding at the space. I designed it, she said, hired someone else to do the hard part. He chuckled, I'd have done it cheaper. I'd have paid you double. He finally sat, still a little wary, but curious now more than anything. She handed him a pastry. Almond, you'll like it. He took a bite and she was right. Of course she was. They talked, not about work, not about money, about books they'd read, places they wanted to visit. Jake came up. Her childhood did too. She mentioned a boarding school in Switzerland. He mentioned never leaving the 5 boroughs. But none of it felt like a comparison. It felt like 2 puzzle pieces being tested against each other. Why did you really offer us that seat? He asked eventually. She hesitated, eyes on the skyline. Because you looked like you were trying so hard to hold it all together. And because I wanted to sit with someone who wasn't performing. He looked down at the pastry in his hand. I'm not used to being noticed like that. I'm not used to people not noticing me for the wrong reason, she said quietly. They sat in silence for a while, the city stretching out before them. And then she turned to him, brows lifted. So, are you going to ask me out already, or do I need to buy you another museum? He laughed, startled. You're serious? Deadly. I don't have a sitter. I have a friend who owes me a favor, she said. She works with kids and has a background check longer than most FBI agents. He stared at her. You came prepared. I don't go into anything halfway. He looked at her, this woman who somehow made him feel like he could breathe again after months of treading water. I'll take you to dinner, he said finally, but only if I get to pay. She raised an eyebrow. Even if we go somewhere with cloth napkins? Especially then. And for the first time in years, Shane felt like maybe just maybe life was shifting towards something good. Something unexpected and terrifying and real. He just didn't know yet how much of his world was about to change, or how deeply this woman, this impossibly layered woman, would alter it. Shane adjusted the collar of his cleanest shirt as he stood in front of the mirror in the cramped hallway of his apartment. His reflection looked nervous, not the kind of nervous that came before a job interview or a landlord meeting. He was used to those. This was different. This was the kind of nervous that came from knowing he was about to step into a world he'd never been invited into. Jake was in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a woman named Tessa, who Emery had introduced the day before. She was warm, funny, and had passed Jake's extremely high standards for bedtime story voices. Shane had checked her references, not because he doubted Emery, but because he had learned the hard way that trust needed to be earned, not gifted blindly. He reached for his wallet, slid it into his back pocket, then paused. The corners of Emery's card still peeked out. He left it there. When he stepped into the living room, Jake looked up from his crayons. "Are you going to dinner with the lady from the museum?" "I am," Shane said, kneeling beside him. "You gonna be good for Tessa?" Jake nodded solemnly, then leaned in. "If you like her, you should tell her." Shane blinked. "Where did you hear that?" "TV," Jake whispered, like it was top-secret information. Shane kissed the top of his head and grabbed his jacket. By the time he reached the building Emery lived in, the sun had dipped low enough to cast the city in gold. He stepped into the lobby, where the doorman who looked like he could moonlight as a Vogue model gave him a once-over before pressing a button. "Ms. Hollies is expecting you." The elevator ride was smooth, silent, and more luxurious than most hotels Shane had ever stayed in. When the doors opened onto the penthouse, he stepped out and froze. The entryway alone was bigger than his entire apartment. Wooden floors stretched toward glass walls that revealed a skyline view so sharp it didn't look real. And at the center of it all stood Emery, barefoot, in a navy wrap dress that looked like it had been made just for her. "You're early," she said, tying the last loop of her belt. "I like that." "I was afraid if I waited too long, I'd chicken out." She walked toward him, her expression unreadable. "Still thinking about galaxies?" she asked. He looked around. "I'm pretty sure I just stepped into one." She laughed, but it was quieter than before, softer. "I thought we'd skip the typical stuff," she said. "No overpriced steakhouse, no tasting menus, just dinner. I made it." "You cook?" he asked, surprised. "I can follow instructions, and I had help." She gestured toward the kitchen, where a small stack of recipe cards sat next to a bottle of wine. "Don't get too excited. It's pasta." He followed her into the kitchen, where the table was already set. Candles flickered in low glass holders, and soft jazz played from unseen speakers. It was elegant, but not stiff. Warm, somehow. As they sat down, Emery poured the wine. "I've lived in this city for 8 years," she said, "and this is the first time I've ever cooked for someone in this apartment." Shane held her gaze. "Why now?" "Because you're not here for any of this," she said, gesturing around. "You're here despite it." He nodded slowly. "You're right, I didn't come for the view." They ate, and the conversation deepened. She asked about Jake's favorite books. He asked about the last thing that had made her cry. She told him about a documentary on sea turtles. He admitted to crying during a school play where Jake had forgotten his lines and still bowed like he'd won an Oscar. Emery leaned back in her chair. "You're not what I expected." "What were you expecting?" "Someone defensive. Someone who'd see all this and assume I was trying to buy their attention. I did, Shane said. At first. But then I realized you didn't care whether I said yes or no. You were just offering something. She looked down at her glass, then back up. That's rare for me. He studied her. Why don't you have people over? She hesitated. Because people come for the penthouse. The wine, the rooftop with the imported plants. They don't stay for me. Or if they do, it's because they think my name means something they can use. And me. You showed up with drywall dust on your shirt and still asked me questions like I mattered. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. You do. The air shifted, the kind of shift that didn't need words. She stood first. Come on, there's something I want to show you. They climbed the narrow staircase that led to the rooftop, but this time, Emery didn't stop at the lounge area. She unlocked a side gate Shane hadn't noticed before and led him up a second, smaller staircase that opened to a private overlook. From there, the city looked endless. I come up here when I need to remember the world is bigger than whatever problem I'm stuck on, she said. Shane stepped beside her. It's easy to forget that when you're always trying to survive. She turned to him. Is that what you're doing? Some days. Other days, it's just about making sure Jake doesn't feel like we're missing anything. Emery didn't reply right away. When she did, her voice was unusually quiet. I think you're doing more than surviving. He met her eyes. So are you. They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the city below like a distant hum. Then, without warning, she reached for his hand. I don't know what this is, she said, but I haven't felt this steady in a long time. He squeezed her hand. I don't know what this is either, but I want to find out. She leaned in, just enough that her shoulder brushed his. You're not intimidated by me. No, he said, I'm just trying not to fall too fast. She looked up. Why not? Because can't afford to mess this up. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I don't want you to be careful? He didn't answer, he just kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't tentative. It was quiet certainty, like something that had been coming for a while and finally arrived exactly when it was supposed to. When they pulled apart, Emery rested her forehead against his. I've had dates in Paris with men who own vineyards. I've had dinners in Dubai with CEOs. But you're the first person who's ever made me feel like I was just enough. You are enough, he said, but I have to ask you something. Her brows lifted. Anything. Where do we go from here? She paused, then smiled. Somewhere honest. He nodded, heart thudding. I'll take that. And somewhere, deep inside the part of him that had forgotten what hope felt like, something stirred. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to find out. The morning after their rooftop kiss, Shane woke up to sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor of his apartment, cutting through the blinds in angled slats. Jake was curled up beside him, one arm flung across his chest, breathing peacefully. There was something about waking up like that, not rushed, not panicked, that settled a quiet peace in his chest. For the first time in a long time, the day didn't feel like something he had to brace for. He shifted carefully so he wouldn't wake his son, stepped out of bed, and padded into the kitchen. The coffee was already brewing, a habit he'd trained into himself after too many mornings of Jake demanding cereal before he could think straight. As he poured the first cup, his phone buzzed on the counter. It was Emery's name on the screen. He hesitated a beat before answering. Good morning, he said, voice still rough with sleep. Do you have plans this afternoon? He glanced at the fridge, where a calendar with 2 overlapping school permission slips and a magnet from the dentist's office sat crooked. Only if you count laundry and fixing a neighbor's busted faucet. Move them, she said firmly. I need you for something. He raised an eyebrow. You need me or you want to see me? I need you, she said with a note of mischief, and I'll explain when you get here. By the time Shane and Jake arrived at her building later that afternoon, the air had already shifted. It wasn't just the weather, though the sky was clear and sharp against the buildings. There was something anticipatory in the way Emery had sounded. Something that made his stomach flip, even though he told himself not to read into it. Tessa met them in the lobby, already holding Jake's favorite backpack and a new set of dinosaur-themed markers. Hey, buddy, she said warmly. Want to come draw me a T-Rex with wings? Jake lit up and followed her without hesitation, waving over his shoulder. Shane watched them go, then turned to Emery as she appeared by the elevator. She wore a tailored blazer over wide-legged pants, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look like she was about to close $1 million deal which, for all he knew, she had. You look like you mean business, he said. I do, she replied, stepping into the elevator. Today, I'm going to show you something important. The elevator doors opened directly into her penthouse, but she didn't stop there. She led him across the living room, past the long glass windows and the view he was still getting used to, and opened a side door he hadn't noticed before. Behind it was a private office, sleek but lived in. A long desk sat beneath a wall of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, each shelf lined with leather-bound volumes and framed photographs. Some of her as a child in boarding school uniforms, others at events with people Shane recognized from magazine covers. You run everything from here, he asked, stepping inside. Mostly, she said. The companies, the board seats, the investments, this is the nerve center. He turned to her. Why are you showing me this? She met his eyes. Because I want you to see the whole picture, not just the dinners and the rooftop. This is part of me too. He walked to the desk, ran a hand along the polished wood. You've built more than a life, you've built an empire. She smiled faintly, and it never felt complete until I met you. He froze. That's a lot to say. I know, she said, stepping closer. But I've spent years building walls so people couldn't get close enough to see the cracks. And then you came along and didn't care about the walls or the cracks. You saw me. He exhaled slowly, the weight of her words settling over him. I'm not used to being part of someone else's world, he said. I've spent so long trying to hold my own together. You don't have to choose between them. He looked at her, searching for the catch. What exactly are you saying? I want you and Jake to be part of my life, fully. I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'm asking if you'll let me in. He looked down at the floor, overwhelmed. Then, after a moment, he asked, why me? She stepped closer, her voice quieter now. Because when I'm with you, I'm not Emery Hollies the investor or the millionaire or the woman people try to impress. I'm just a person, and that's all I've ever wanted to be. He nodded, eyes still fixed on the floor. And what happens when people find out, when the press starts sniffing around, when Jake's name ends up in headlines next to yours? I've already spoken to my lawyer, she said. There are protections in place, and if we do this, it's on our terms. No photo ops, no interviews, just us. Shane looked up. You planned this. I planned for the possibility, she said, because I don't want to lose you over logistics. He stepped back, ran a hand through his hair, then let out a breath. I don't know how to be with someone who can buy a building with a phone call. I'm not asking you to be with that person. I'm asking you to be with me. The silence stretched between them. Then Shane walked to the bookshelf, pulled down a framed photo of Emery as a teenager, laughing with braces and a crooked ponytail. You've always been this person, he said, even before the money. She nodded. I had to lose a lot to remember that. He turned to her. Let's try. Her eyes softened. Really? I don't know what it'll look like. I don't even know how it's supposed to work. But if we're honest with each other, I'd rather try and fail than never know." She crossed the room in 2 steps and kissed him like she'd been holding her breath for days. When they pulled apart, she rested her hands on his chest. "I have something else to show you." He followed her back to the living room, where a small leather folder sat on the table. Emery opened it, revealing a series of architectural sketches, contracts, and a floor plan. "This is a project I've been working on for months," she said. "A community center in Red Hook. After I met you, I redesigned the entire thing." He looked at the sketches: a workshop space, a childcare wing, a job training area, a community garden on the roof. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "I want you to run it." He blinked. "What?" "I've seen how you work with your hands, how you talk to people, how you take care of Jake. You're exactly the kind of person who should be building something that lasts." He stared at her, stunned. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you a purpose, and it comes with a salary, benefits, and a flexible schedule so you never have to miss a school play again." He sat down slowly, absorbing it all. "I don't know what to say." "I say yes." He looked at her, then at the sketches again. "I want this, but only if we do it together." "Of course," she said. "This isn't a gift, it's a partnership." He stood and pulled her into his arms. "Then yes." Later that evening, back at his apartment, Shane sat beside Jake as he colored on the floor. "Hey, buddy," he said, "what would you think about moving somewhere with a little more space? Maybe a backyard?" Jake looked up. "Will there be dogs?" "Maybe. Will Emery live nearby?" Shane smiled. "She might live with us." Jake considered this, then nodded. "Okay, but only if I get the top bunk." "Deal." A month later, they moved into a brownstone Emery had purchased quietly, tucked into a quiet block near Prospect Park. It had enough room for a workshop, a vegetable garden, and a backyard that Jake immediately declared perfect for a treehouse. At their private ceremony in the garden just a few weeks after, Shane wore the same watch he'd pawned once and bought back with his first paycheck from the community center. Emery wore a simple gown and a look of peace that hadn't left her since the day Shane said yes. As she walked toward him, Jake stood between them, holding the rings. The officiant smiled. "Do you, Emery Hollies, take Shane Bradford to be your partner in life, love, and all things unexpected?" "I do," she said, eyes never leaving Shane's. "And do you, Shane Bradford, take Emery Hollies to be your partner in every moment, from the quiet ones to the wild ones?" Shane looked at Jake, then at Emery. "I absolutely do." When they kissed, it wasn't just a moment. It was a promise not of perfection, but of something better: honesty, partnership, and a love that had never needed labels to feel real. Later that night, they danced in the backyard under café lights and stars, Jake fast asleep in a hammock nearby. Emery leaned into Shane's chest. "We built something, didn't we?" He kissed the top of her head. "Yeah, and it's just getting started." 3 months passed, and the rhythm of their life settled into something that felt impossibly natural. The brownstone Emery and Shane, now shared, never felt like a house she purchased, it felt like a home they built together. The scent of pancakes on Sunday mornings, scattered toy dinosaurs across the living room floor, and late night jazz humming from an old record player Shane had rescued and restored, it all filled the space with a kind of warmth money could never buy. The community center in Red Hook opened amid cheers and the scent of fresh paint. Shane wore a navy button-down Emery had picked out for him, Jake gripped his hand the entire ribbon-cutting ceremony, and Emery stood just offstage, her fingers laced together, watching the two people she loved most be celebrated like they'd built the place with their bare hands. In a way, they had. Shane didn't expect to love the role as much as he did. He thought he'd be overwhelmed managing volunteers, coordinating with local schools, balancing the books, but it turned out years of making do with less had made him a master of resourcefulness. What surprised him most was how naturally people trusted him. Parents started asking his advice on everything from leaking pipes to navigating custody schedules. Teens hung back after workshops just to talk. People listened to him, and he. One evening, as the sun sank behind the city and turned the sky the color of dark honey, Emery sat on the back steps of the brownstone, watching Jake chase fireflies with a mason jar and a busted flashlight. Shane walked out with 2 mugs of tea, sitting beside her as she tucked her knees to her chest. "Did you ever think this would be your life?" he asked, handing her one of the mugs. She looked out at the yard and shook her head. "I thought I'd end up alone, not in a tragic way, just separate, like I wasn't built to be part of a unit." "But you were." "I didn't know that until you and Jake walked into that café." He let the silence settle for a moment, then said, "There's something I've been thinking about." She turned to him, curious. "The center's doing well, the programs are expanding, we've got more volunteers than space sometimes. I was thinking, what if we opened another one, somewhere uptown or even in another borough?" Emery's face lit up not with surprise, but with pride. "I'd back that," she said, "fully. I'd want to do it right." "You will, and I'll help however you need. But Shane," she turned fully toward him, her voice steady, "you don't need my money to make it happen. You've already proven that." "I know," he nodded, "but I'm not afraid of leaning on you anymore. Not because I need saving, because we're a team." She reached over and brushed a thumb along his jaw. "Exactly." Jake ran up, breathless and triumphant, holding the jar aloft. Inside, 2 glowing fireflies blinked lazily. "Can we keep them?" he asked, eyes wide. Shane looked at Emery, then back at Jake. "Just for tonight, then we let them go." "Okay," Jake whispered, staring at the jar like it held magic. Later that night, after Jake had fallen asleep with the jar on his bedside table and a flashlight still clutched in one hand, Emery and Shane lay in bed, the window open to the sounds of the summer night. "I've been thinking about something too," she said, her voice quiet in the dark. Shane turned toward her. "Yeah. I want to change my last name." He blinked in surprise. "You do?" "I've never done that before, never wanted to, but now I want to be a Bradford, not just on paper, everywhere." He reached for her hand beneath the sheets and squeezed it. "Then let's make it official." A few weeks later, they did this time with friends, neighbors, and families from the community center packed into the garden behind the brownstone. Jake wore a tiny suit and walked Emery down the makeshift aisle they'd made from repurposed wood planks and wildflowers. Shane stood at the end, in a charcoal suit Emery had tailored for him, with a look on his face like nothing else in the world existed. When Emery reached him, she whispered, "This time we build everything together." The vows were spoken beneath string lights and the sound of wind rustling through the trees. There was no orchestra or 5-tier cake. Just homemade food, laughter, and a kind of joy that made the air feel electric. After the ceremony, Jake tugged on Shane's sleeve. "Can I call her Mom now?" Shane knelt down beside him. "Why don't you ask her?" Jake walked over to Emery, who was in the middle of hugging one of the community center volunteers. He tugged her dress gently. "Can I call you Mom?" Her breath caught. She crouched down, cupped his cheeks. "I would love that," she whispered, tears already welling in her eyes. Jake threw his arms around her neck, and she held him tightly, her heart full in a way it had never been before. That night, after the last guest had left and the cake had disappeared, Shane and Emery stood in the kitchen, still in their wedding clothes, barefoot, sipping champagne from mismatched mugs. "We did it," he said, tapping his mug to hers. "No," she corrected gently, "we're just getting started." He grinned. "So what's next, Mrs. Bradford?" She leaned in, kissed him slow and deep. "Whatever we want." And they meant it. They traveled with Jake over the next year weekend trips to the coast, a week in the mountains, even a visit to a tiny village in the south of France where Emery had once studied as a teenager. But no matter where they went, they always came back to the brownstone. It was theirs. A place rooted in love, not money. The second community center opened the following fall, with Shane giving a speech that left half the room in tears and the other half standing in applause. Emery didn't stand on the stage that time. She stood in the back, her hand on Jake's shoulder, watching the man she loved do what he was born to do. People didn't whisper about her anymore, not because they'd stopped noticing her wealth, but because it no longer defined her. Emery Bradford wasn't a headline or a socialite. She was a woman who'd found something real, and she held onto it with both hands. Years later, on a quiet spring morning, Shane sat on the front steps drinking coffee while Jake, now taller and louder, and just as curious, practiced guitar in the sunroom. Emery stepped outside, holding a newspaper with a headline about a new initiative she and Shane had launched for underfunded schools. She handed it to him without a word. He read the headline, then looked up. "You still surprise me." She sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You surprised me first," she said, "and I've never stopped thanking the universe for it." They sat there in the warmth, no need for more words. Shane had once been a man holding his world together with calloused hands and quiet resilience. Emery had once been a woman hidden behind glass towers and designer armor. But now, they were just two people who had chosen each other every day, in every way. And that choice, as it turned out, was the happiest ending of all.